I swapped my cheating husband's lubricant with glue, and the paramedics called 1am. I met him on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that didn't promise anything special. I was rushing out of the pharmacy, juggling my bag, my phone, a pack of vitamins I wasn't even sure I needed, and a tired body that just wanted sleep. I wasn't paying attention. Truth is, I rarely did in those days, so when I walked straight into someone, everything flew out of my hands. Lip balm rolled away, my keys clattered, the vitamins hit the ground like tiny judgmental witnesses. Before I even looked up, I heard a voice, warm, steady, and genuinely alarmed. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Here, let me help." When I finally raised my head, he was already gathering my things with a kind of gentle urgency that didn't match his size. His hands were big, confident, but careful, like he didn't want to break anything that belonged to me. His eyes lifted to mine, and something in my chest shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet click, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. He smiled, not the wide, show-off type, a small, intentional smile that made you feel chosen. "Are you okay?" he asked, brushing imaginary dust off my keyholder before placing it in my palm. No man had ever done that for me, not like that. He walked me to my car, packing slowly, talking in this calm, coaxing tone that loosened tension I didn't even know I was carrying. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't performing. He was just present. And in a world full of men who only show up halfway, presence felt like a gift. At the car, he hesitated a little, like he didn't want the moment to end, then asked for my number. Not with entitlement, not with pressure, but with a hopeful softness that made me curious. A softness that made me want to keep listening to whatever else his voice had to say. I gave it to him. My fingers shook slightly as I typed, though I pretended it was the cold. When I finally drove off, I watched him through my rearview mirror, tall, confident, and somehow familiar to a part of me I didn't know existed. And right there, in that quiet parking lot, I heard myself think a thought I had never dared to think about any man. Maybe this is the one I've been waiting for. My family saw it long before I did. They always say love makes you blind, but with me, it didn't just blind me, it deafened me too. I couldn't hear anything except the sound of his name echoing sweetly in my head. The first warning came from my mother. She watched me dress up for a date one evening, her eyes following the new glow on my face. "Samantha," she said gently, "slow down. You don't know this man well enough." I laughed it off, hugging her from behind like a teenager in love. "Mummy, relax, he's different." She didn't smile back. That was the first sign. My sister was less subtle. She cornered me in the kitchen one night, arms folded, eyes sharp. "So you've known him for, what, 2 months, and you're already talking like you'll die if he doesn't call you." I rolled my eyes and called her dramatic, but when she walked away muttering, "Love shouldn't make you rush like you're running from something," her words settled in my chest heavier than I expected. Even my father, quiet, calm, rarely involved in matters of the heart, cleared his throat one evening and said, "Take your time, my daughter. A man who is truly good will still be good next year. Don't hurry yourself into someone's shadow." But I had already convinced myself I wasn't stepping into a shadow. I thought I was walking into sunlight. The final warning came during a family dinner. Everyone was talking, laughing, passing plates. Then my aunt, who never sugar-coated anything, leaned forward and asked, "What exactly is the rush? Why are you moving as if somebody is chasing you into marriage?" I felt attacked, embarrassed, exposed. I told them all that when you know, you know. That love didn't have to follow a timetable. That he was perfect for me, and they needed to trust my judgment. But the truth, deep in the quietest corner of my heart, I wasn't rushing because he was perfect. I was rushing because I feared that if I slowed down, if I hesitated even for a moment, he might slip away. And I didn't want to lose something that felt like a miracle. So I shut their warnings out. Every voice, every caution, every gentle pull to slow down. And I so sure, so stubborn, so hopelessly in love, walked forward anyway. Those first weeks with him felt like stepping into a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Everything about our courtship glowed with a kind of softness that made me believe destiny had finally remembered me. He seemed to anticipate my needs before I voiced them, and every gesture, no matter how small, felt like proof that I had chosen right, that my rushing wasn't a mistake. He called me every morning at exactly 7:15, just as I was getting out of bed. "Good morning, Samantha," he would say in that calm, steady voice that made me smile even when my eyes were barely open. Not once did he miss a day. I told my friends it was consistency, but deep down, I took it as devotion. He showed up with food when I was too tired to cook, always knowing my cravings before I did. One evening, he brought jollof rice from my favorite spot. "How did you know?" I asked, surprised. "I pay attention," he said with that slow smile. And I believed him. I believed everything he said. He listened, at least it felt like he did. When I talked, he leaned forward slightly, nodded at the right spots, held my hand across the table. I mistook his silence for understanding and his calmness for depth. I didn't realize he was simply good at giving just enough to keep me hooked. Our dates were simple but enchanting. Long walks, shared suya, late-night talks sitting in his car with the windows down and music low. He asked questions that made me feel seen, even if I now realize they were the kind of questions any man with charm and intention could ask. I introduced him to my friends, and he charmed them effortlessly, even the skeptical ones. "He's so gentle," one said. "He seems like husband material," another whispered when he wasn't listening. And I held onto those words like evidence. In truth, I filled in the gaps with what I wanted him to be. Every small gesture became a sign. Every sweet text became a promise. Every compliment felt like a glimpse into the future I had already built in my head. He never argued, never questioned me, never pushed back. I called it peace, but it was just silence. I mistook quiet for compatibility and gentleness for goodness. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't in love with him. I was in love with the version of him I created, the polished dream of a man I wanted so desperately to believe in. But back then, back then it felt perfect. So perfect I never once stopped to ask myself why everything felt too smooth, too easy, too controlled. I was already sinking, and I didn't even know it. He proposed on a warm Sunday evening, the kind of evening that felt too beautiful to question anything. We had gone out for dinner, nothing extravagant, just a quiet place with dim lights, soft music, and enough privacy for me to hear my own heartbeat. I remember thinking the night felt unusually calm, almost staged, but I pushed the thought away. I always pushed things away when it came to him. We talked about ordinary things, work, family, weekend plans, yet he kept looking at me like he was waiting for the right moment to breathe. I didn't notice it then. I only saw a man who adored me. Or at least, that's what I told myself. After dinner, he insisted we take a walk outside. The air was warm, the sky fatting into this deep blue that made everything feel intimate. We stood near his car, and he kept shifting his weight like he was battling nerves. Then he took my hands, both of them, and for a second, I swear the world paused just long enough for me to feel chosen. "Samantha," he began, voice low and steady, "I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're mine." Those words hit me like a wave, soft but overwhelming. My heart fluttered, my knees weakened, and before I could fully process what was happening, he was already going down on one knee. He pulled out a small velvet box, the kind I had dreamed of since I was a girl imagining fairy tale moments. When he opened it, the ring sparkled under the streetlight, and something inside me broke open. Logic, caution, slowness, all of it dissolved. "I love you," he said. "Marry me." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of proposal people film and upload online. But it was tender. It was wrapped in simplicity and delivered with a certainty I had been craving my whole life. No doubts, no hesitation. He sounded so sure of me, and that was all I needed to hear. I didn't think about my mother's warnings. I didn't think about my father's quiet advice. I didn't think about the pace, how fast everything was moving. I didn't think at all. I said yes before he even finished standing up. He slipped the ring on my finger, and I felt this rush, this intoxicating blend of love, pride, and the thrill of being chosen by a man I thought was perfect. He lifted me into a hug, spinning me slightly, whispering, "You won't regret this," into my hair. At the time, it felt like a promise. Now, I know it was a prophecy I should have listened to more carefully. But that night, with the streetlight glowing above us and my heart pounding like it finally found a home, I believed him completely. The tiny red flags started quietly, so quietly I convinced myself they were nothing. When love is new, you don't look for shadows, you look for excuses. And I had a fresh, shimmering excuse for everything he did. The first red flag was his temper disguised as passion. One evening, his phone rang while we were together. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and rejected the call so hard the phone nearly slipped from his hand. "Who was that?" I asked, half joking. "Nobody," he said too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A minute later, the phone rang again. This time he silenced it without looking. His jaw tightened for a second, then relaxed the moment he turned back to me. I told myself he was simply protecting our moment. I ignored the discomfort curling in my stomach. The second red flag was his need to always know where I was. If I took too long to reply, he called. If I didn't pick up immediately, he called again. Sometimes he popped into my workplace with snacks I didn't ask for. "You're my priority," he would say, kissing my forehead. I smiled then. That kind of attention felt flattering. But later, I would lie awake wondering why someone who trusted me needed constant updates on my movements. The third red flag was his subtle possessiveness. He never directly told me what to wear, but he had opinions, a lot of them. "That dress is nice, but maybe wear the blue one. It looks more decent. That friend of yours talks too much. I don't think she has your best interest at heart. I prefer when you don't post too many pictures. Not everyone deserves to see you." He made it sound like care, not control, and I, God help me, believed it. The fourth red flag was his selective openness. He always wanted to know everything about me, my past, my fears, my dreams. But when I asked about his childhood, his exes, or even simple things like his daily routine, his answers came wrapped in vagueness. "Let's not talk about that. It's not important. Another time." And because I didn't want to ruin the peace, I let him dodge every question. But the tiniest red flag, the one I buried the deepest, was how he made me feel when he was upset. One day, I got home late due to traffic. I called him, but he didn't pick up. When he finally called back, his tone was clipped. "You should have planned better," he snapped. I apologized even though I'd done nothing wrong. And when he sighed and said, "Just don't let it happen again," I felt relieved, as if I had narrowly escaped something. Looking back, I realized these were not tiny red flags. They were bright warning signs flashing in front of me, begging me to slow down. But I was too in love, too eager to prove everyone wrong, too desperate to believe I had finally found something real. So I folded every red flag neatly, tucked them into the corners of my mind, and kept walking, straight into the storm I didn't know was waiting for me. The morning of my wedding felt like stepping into a dream I had prayed for but never truly examined. Everything happened in a rush, makeup brushes sweeping across my face, hands adjusting my veil, people moving in and out of the room with excited whispers. But beneath all the noise, there was a quiet thump in my chest that didn't feel like joy. It felt like hesitation, a soft, warning pulse I pretended not to hear. My mother's eyes lingered on me longer than necessary as she fastened my earrings. "Samantha," she murmured, "if you're not sure." "I'm sure," I cut in too quickly. She nodded, but her hands trembled just enough for me to notice. Everyone around me kept saying how beautiful I looked, how lucky I was, how perfect he was. Their words wrapped around me like ribbons I didn't ask for. I smiled, laughed, and posed for pictures, but inside I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't see clearly. When the car arrived to take me to the venue, I climbed in with my heart hammering against the corset of my dress. The closer we got to the hall, the quieter I became. My bridesmaids chatted excitedly, adjusting their gowns, teasing each other, but their voices felt distant, as if I were underwater listening to people on land. The moment I stepped out of the car, I saw him waiting at the entrance of the hall, looking sharp and composed, surrounded by his groomsmen. He flashed that same careful smile he used the day we met, the one that made me feel chosen, the one I had built my entire future on. And for a moment, the uneasy thump in my chest went silent. "Samantha," he whispered when I reached him, leaning closer than necessary. "You look perfect." His voice was smooth, reassuring. It wrapped around me like a promise. I swallowed my doubts. Inside the hall, everything glowed. Flowers lining the aisle, soft music filling the space, guests turning their heads with adoration written across their faces. They saw a fairy tale. They saw happiness. They saw what I wanted them to see, what I wanted to see too. My father walked me down the aisle, his grip firm but gentle. Halfway through, he squeezed my hand ever so slightly. When I glanced at him, his eyes were soft but searching, as if silently asking, "Are you sure, Samantha? Are you truly sure?" I looked away before the doubt could settle. When we reached the altar, my husband-to-be took my hands and held them tightly, too tightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough to remind me of all those tiny red flags I had folded away. The pastor began speaking, but his words blurred into a distant hum. I stared at my groom's face, searching for reassurance, for the warmth I used to feel, for something that would anchor me. Instead, I found a man I realized I barely knew, someone I had fallen in love with too quickly, someone I was now promising forever to. But the hall was full. The music was playing. The cameras were recording, and I was already at the altar with a ring waiting to be slipped onto my finger. When it was time to say my vows, my voice trembled for a second, just a second, but I steadied it. I told myself love was a leap, and I had already jumped. He said his vows smoothly, confidently, like a man who had rehearsed everything down to the breath. When the pastor pronounced us husband and wife, applause filled the hall. Everyone cheered, and I smiled, big, bright, and convincing. My new husband kissed me, holding me close, and everyone saw a perfect moment. But inside, behind that smile, behind the veil, behind the makeup and the fanfare, a tiny voice whispered a truth I would only understand much later. I rushed. I knew it, and something deep inside me knew this day wasn't the beginning of forever. It was the beginning of the unraveling. Standing at the altar, holding his hands, I felt the weight of every heartbeat in my chest. The music swelled softly around us, the crowd blurred into a sea of faces, but all I could see was him. I took a deep breath and began. "I, Samantha, take you as my husband," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of nerves under my skin. "I promise to love you, to honor you, and to stand by your side through every joy and every sorrow, through every easy day and every hard one." I watched his eyes glisten under the soft light, the same eyes I had believed were my safe harbor. "I vow to support your dreams and to share mine with you. I promise to trust you, to listen, and to forgive, even when it's hard. I will laugh with you in times of happiness and comfort you in times of despair. I will hold your hand when the world feels heavy, and I will never forget the love that brought us here today." The words felt heavy on my tongue, more real than I had expected. Every promise was a leap into a future I had imagined perfectly in my head, without fully knowing the man I was promising it to. I swallowed the lump in my throat and added the last, quiet vow. "I will choose you, every day, as long as we both shall live." When he spoke his vows, I listened carefully, smiling through the warmth I felt in my chest. They were beautiful, rehearsed, perfect, the kind of words anyone could say when they wanted to sound like a husband you'd always dreamed of. And for that moment, I believed them. But deep down, beneath the rings and the applause, a tiny part of me, the part I tried to silence, wondered if promises made on a day like this could withstand the truth of who we really were. I kissed him when he finished, the crowd erupted in cheers, and I smiled, because at that moment I was a bride. I was in love, I was certain. Or at least I thought I was. It started as a quiet suspicion, the kind that creeps in slowly and lodges itself in the back of your mind, refusing to leave. At first, I tried to ignore it. After all, I had told myself so many times that he was perfect, that I had chosen well, that everything he did was out of love for me. But that evening, as I was folding the laundry, the suspicion became undeniable. I was carefully going through his shirts, smoothing out wrinkles, when something caught my eye. Tucked between the folds of his favorite white shirt was a small, crumpled wrapper. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly, and instantly recognized it. A condom wrapper. My stomach dropped as if it had turned into a stone. My heart pounded in my ears, loud enough that I was sure anyone in the next room could hear it. I froze, holding the wrapper in my hand like it might vanish if I didn't confront it directly. My mind raced, trying to come up with any excuse, any reason it could be there. Maybe a friend left it, maybe it was old, but deep down I knew the truth. And it cut sharper than I expected. The neat little lie I had been telling myself, the lie that he was perfect, that our love was unshakable, shattered in that instant. I sank onto the couch, the wrapper still in my hand, staring at it as if it were a puzzle that could solve itself if I just looked long enough. I replayed the past few weeks in my mind. The nights he came home late, the vague excuses about work, the secretive glances at his phone, the sudden meetings he couldn't explain. Every little inconsistency now fit together in a pattern I had refused to see, like pieces of a mirror suddenly snapping into place, revealing an image I could barely believe. That night I didn't confront him. I couldn't. My rage was too raw, too chaotic. I needed to think, to plan, to process the betrayal without giving him the satisfaction of seeing me break down immediately. I paced the living room endlessly, glancing at the wrapper again and again, feeling my blood boil, my pulse spike, my thoughts tangle. Anger, disbelief, and a burning sense of betrayal churned together, leaving me both numb and alive with fury at the same time. The next day, I began to observe him more closely. I noticed the way his phone vibrated and how he jumped slightly whenever it rang. I noticed the late-night texts he answered quickly and then hurriedly put away. I noticed how he was suddenly too careful with his words, how his casual jokes had an edge of guilt in them, and how he avoided eye contact when certain subjects came up. Every tiny inconsistency, every hidden glance, every unexplained detail now screamed at me like a warning I should have heeded from the beginning. And as the hours passed, holding the small evidence in my hand, I realized something that filled me with both fear and clarity. The man I had rushed into marriage with, the one I had built up in my mind as perfect, was capable of betrayal. The thought made my chest tighten, made my hands shake, and yet, at the same time, ignited a cold, simmering rage deep in my bones. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't make a scene. I simply made a decision, a quiet, firm, unshakable decision that he would never underestimate me again. I thought about how he had taken my trust for granted, how he had treated my love like it was something to manipulate, not cherish. And I vowed in that moment that I would never allow him to do it again. That night, as I sat alone, the wrapper discarded but still burning in my mind, I felt something awaken in me, a strength I didn't know I had. I realized that love without respect is nothing, and trust once broken becomes a weapon, not a gift. I didn't yet know how I would act, but I knew I would act. Because I was Samantha, and I refused to be anyone's fool. Not now, not ever. By the time I made the decision to act, the anger inside me had settled into something sharper, colder, a kind of calculated fire that left no room for hesitation. I spent nights turning the evidence over and over in my mind, replaying every lie, every secretive smile, every carefully rehearsed excuse he had ever offered. The betrayal wasn't just a shock, it was a challenge, and I wasn't going to let him write the story of us, or of me, any longer. I thought about confronting him directly, yelling, crying, demanding answers. But something in me knew that would satisfy only a fraction of the justice I wanted. It would make him defensive, maybe remorseful for a moment, but it wouldn't make him see what he had done. I wanted him to understand the weight of his actions. I wanted him to feel the consequences of his choices, and I wanted to make sure it was clear. I was not powerless. It started as a quiet, almost mischievous idea, a thought so small I almost dismissed it. But the more I turned it over in my mind, the more it made sense. If he thought he could betray me without consequence, without accountability, he was sorely mistaken. I wanted him to be reminded, in a way he could not ignore, that I was more than a wife. I was a woman capable of protecting herself, of taking control, of making him confront the truth in a way that words alone could never do. I planned carefully, making sure everything was discreet. I watched, I waited, I studied his habits. Every morning, every night, every mundane routine became part of the puzzle I was assembling. The thought of him discovering the result, the shock on his face, the helplessness that would flash in his eyes, it fueled me. I didn't take pleasure in hurting him. Not exactly. What I craved was clarity, accountability, a reckoning that matched the betrayal I had endured. I also knew I had to be careful. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about precision. One wrong step, one careless move, and it could all blow up on me. I thought about the law, about appearances, about every possible way this could spiral out of control. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I acted with patience, with cunning, I could make the lesson inescapable. And so, with trembling hands but a steady heart, I made my choice. I would not confront him with tears or accusations. I would act silently, deliberately, and let him face the consequences of his own actions. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange mix of fear and empowerment. I was about to cross a line I never thought I would cross, but for the first time in months, I felt entirely in control of my story. The anger was still there, simmering. The hurt lingered, raw and unyielding. But above it all was a single, unshakable truth. He had underestimated me, and I was about to ensure he would never do it again. I was no longer just the wife he had betrayed. I was Samantha, and Samantha didn't forgive easily, especially when it came to deceit. The night I did it, the house held its breath. Every ordinary sound, the hum of the fridge, the distant trickle of water in the neighbor's yard, seemed to swell as if the world itself was listening to what I was about to do. I moved quietly, the way you do when you're trying to become invisible in your own home. My hands felt oddly steady, each movement deliberate not because I was practiced, but because the moment demanded it. This wasn't some rash, cinematic revenge. It was a small, private act born of weeks of bruised pride and sleepless calculation. I stared at the little bottle on the bathroom shelf like it was an accusing eye. For a long time, I simply stood there, cataloging my feelings, anger sharp as glass, grief heavy as an overfilled suitcase, and a strange, cold clarity that made everything else fade into the background. I remembered the nights he'd lied, the way he'd folded my trust into neat excuses, and I let those memories make the choice for me. It felt less like cruelty than a rebalancing, an attempt to tilt back the scales that had been so carelessly upended. The act itself was almost anticlimactic. There was nothing dramatic to it, no cinematic flourish, no triumphant music. Just the hush of late-night light, the soft creak of the floorboards, and the methodical way I carried out the small motions that would set the rest of the story in motion. I kept thinking of the 1,000 tiny betrayals that led me here. The silences he wore like armor, the evasions that became a pattern, the way I had been taught to forgive when forgiveness should not have been the first answer. Once it was done, I stood there with my palms pressed to my thighs, feeling the rapid rhythm of my pulse. A dozen scenarios ran through my head, his confusion, his anger, the way he might try to laugh it off, the way he might crumble. I imagined how he would look at me after that moment, truly seen, finally forced to meet the reflection of what he'd been doing. I did not thrill at the thought of pain. I craved acknowledgement. I wanted him to understand, in a way he could not ignore, that what he had given me in return for my love was deception. Guilt arrived in small, sharp waves, but with each one I reminded myself of the cost of my silence had been higher. I had planned not for his ruin, but for a rupture clean enough to wake us both. That rationale sat beside something more honest and ugly. I wanted to reclaim a part of myself that had been leased out to him, the part that believed I deserved better than lies. The night swallowed my conscience and returned a tempered resolve. Whatever came next, I would not be the woman who stayed silent and small. I cleaned up the minor traces like someone tidying after a storm. No fanfare, no parade. Normality needed to look undisturbed. The ordinary routines of our life had to remain the frame in which the surprise would stand out. When I finally went to bed, sleep didn't come easily. My mind unspooled the scene I would witness. His confusion at first, the scramble, then the slow dawning of recognition. I pictured how the ambulance lights might paint the room, how neighbors might whisper, how our marriage, a structure I had hurried into, might finally fracture in a way that could not be patched with promises. Lying awake, I felt a paradoxical sort of liberation. The decision had been mine, messy and irreversible, but it returned to me a control I hadn't felt since the discovery. It was not justice as neat headlines promise. There would be consequences I could not fully predict, but it was mine. The call came at exactly 1:00 a.m. Not 12:58. Not 1:03. One sharp, slicing ring that dragged me out of sleep and straight into a silence so heavy it felt like someone was sitting on my chest. For a moment, I didn't move. I lay there staring into the darkness, heart thudding, breath shallow, as the phone buzzed again on the table beside me. I knew, instinctively, painfully, that this wasn't a friendly call, not a mistake, not anything ordinary. Midnight calls rarely carry good news, and this one felt like it had been circling me long before the phone ever lit up. When I finally reached for it, my hands trembled. "Hello," my voice sounded unfamiliar, dry, slow, as if wrapped in cotton. A man's voice answered, calm, professional, a tone that had learned to deliver panic in the most soothing way possible. "Good morning, is this Samantha?" My throat tightened. "Yes, who is this?" "This is from the emergency response unit." A pause. A meaningful one. A pause long enough to tell me that the rest would not be simple. "We received a call from your husband. He appears to be in significant distress, severe pain. He's unable to move properly. We're transporting him now." I closed my eyes. My heart didn't leap. It didn't shatter. It just beat, slow, controlled. "What kind of distress?" I asked, though I already knew. Not the details, but the center of it, the event that had been set in motion the moment he reached for that bottle. The paramedic cleared his throat, clearly choosing his words with care. "There seems to be an adhesive substance involved. It's caused, well," another pause, awkward this time, "a rather serious complication." I almost laughed, not from humor, from disbelief, from the surreal edge of reality tilting under me, from the sudden knowledge that the moment I had imagined, the one I had constructed in my mind a dozen times, was no longer a fantasy. It was happening, right now. "Is he conscious?" "Yes, but in extreme discomfort. He asked us to call you." Of course he did. Of course he would reach for me. The woman he lied to, betrayed, underestimated. The irony was sharp enough to taste. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll meet you at the hospital." But when I hung up, I didn't move immediately. I sat on the edge of the bed, the night pressing close around me, listening to the echo of my heartbeat and the faint, distant wail of a siren approaching our street. This was the consequence of choices, his choices, and the catalyst of mine. And as the blue lights flickered through the curtains, painting the walls in cold, shifting color, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a steady, unshakable calm. The story had reached the point of no return. And so had we. When I arrived at the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt too bright, too clean, too honest for what was unfolding. The sliding doors parted with a soft hiss, and the first people I saw were the paramedics, 2 men and a woman, standing near the reception desk. Their faces told me everything before a single word was spoken. The first paramedic, a tall, dark-skinned man with tired eyes, looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and bewildered restraint. He had the expression of someone who had seen many things in his line of work, but this was new even for him. His gaze flicked toward the treatment room, then back at me as if measuring how much to say, how much I could handle. The second paramedic couldn't hide his shock. He tried. Oh, he tried. But the confusion kept slipping through the cracks of his professionalism. His eyebrows were still raised, as if stuck that way from whatever they had witnessed. Every few seconds he glanced at his partner like he needed confirmation that what they had just handled actually happened. Then there was the woman, calm, composed, but with a faint, involuntary twitch of amusement tugging at the corner of her mouth. Not mockery, Not disrespect. Just that quiet, stunned disbelief you get when faced with a situation completely outside the boundaries of routine emergencies. She spoke first, stepping closer. "You're Samantha?" she asked gently. I nodded. Her lips pressed together, fighting the urge to react. Not judgment, just the barely controlled effort of someone replaying the bizarre scene in her mind and trying not to let it show. She continued, We did the best we could to keep him stable." Another small glance toward her colleagues. A silent, shared memory. A memory I wasn't sure. I wanted to imagine too clearly. The taller paramedic cleared his throat, straightening as though remembering his training all over again. "He was in significant pain," he said carefully, and unable to separate himself from the substance. The younger paramedic looked away, jaw tense. I could tell he was reliving the moment they found my husband. Panicked, embarrassed, stuck in a way no man ever wants to be stuck, shouting for help that arrived in uniforms and gloves, not excuses and lies. The female paramedic added quietly, "He kept apologizing. Not to us, to you." My heart didn't soften, but it thudded once, deep and heavy. Then she leaned in just a little, lowering her voice. "I don't know what happened between you two," she said, "but whatever it was, tonight humbled him." Behind her, the young paramedic exhaled through his nose, a sharp breath that sounded like he was still recovering. The tall one simply nodded, as if he had seen enough in that ambulance to understand everything without explanation. And in their faces, shock, pity, restrained curiosity, and that quiet professional respect, I saw the truth reflected back at me. This was the night everything changed. Not just for him. For me. For us. And whatever happened next, the paramedics would carry this story with them for the rest of their careers, while I carried the rest of it into the storm that waited behind the treatment room doors. When I finally stepped into the hospital room, the fluorescent lights cast everything in a stark, unforgiving clarity. He was lying on the bed, tangled in sheets, his face pale and glistening with sweat. The tubes and medical equipment made the room feel cold, clinical, and impossibly real. And there he was, the man I had once believed to be perfect, now reduced to helplessness by his own choices. His eyes widened the moment he saw me, darting between panic and embarrassment, then settling into pleading. "Samantha, I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No," I said, voice low but sharp. "Not a word, not yet." He tried to sit up, grimacing as the adhesive had made movement nearly impossible. The paramedics' presence lingered in the room like silent witnesses, but I ignored them. This wasn't for them. This was for me. "You thought you could betray me," I said slowly, packing the small space, letting each word land. "You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought your lies, your late nights, your whispers to someone else meant nothing. That I would just forgive and forget." He tried to speak again, but I shook my head. "No, you're going to hear this, and then you're going to feel it." I leaned closer, letting my eyes lock onto his, watching the realization slowly dawn. The arrogance, the charm, the confidence, it all crumbled as he finally grasped that I had acted, that the helplessness he now felt was not an accident, not fate, but my doing. "I didn't just discover your betrayal," I continued, voice steady, almost cold. "I made a choice that you can't undo, a choice that forces you to confront every lie you've ever told me, every excuse, every secret." His lips trembled. He tried to speak again. I stepped back, letting him soak in the weight of my words. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear, and the tension between us was almost tangible, like electricity crackling in the air. "You trusted yourself to deceive me," I said, softer now, almost whispering. "But you forgot one thing, you underestimated me. You thought I'd be blind. You thought I'd be weak. You were wrong." For a long moment, he didn't move. The only sound was the steady beep of the monitors and the occasional shuffle of the paramedics checking vitals. And in that silence, I felt something shift, not just in him, but in me. I wasn't the naive, rushing bride anymore. I was a woman who had taken control, a woman who refused to be a victim. Finally, he managed a whisper, hoarse and shaky. Samantha, please. I shook my head slowly. No, you don't get to beg. Not now. Not ever. You get to feel what it's like to be powerless. You get to realize that some actions have consequences. And this is yours. I turned to the paramedics briefly, giving them a nod of reassurance, and then looked back at him. This is the moment you finally understand the truth, I said. Not from my words, not from anyone else, but from the reality of your own choices. And I won't forget it. For the first time in months, I felt completely in control. And he, helpless, trapped, and facing the consequences, finally had no choice but to see me, truly see me, in all the power I had taken back. The aftermath didn't explode. It unfolded slowly, like a bruise spreading beneath the skin. The hospital discharged him 2 days later, sore, humiliated, and wrapped in a silence so heavy it pressed on both of us. They gave him medication, instructions, and a pamphlet about accidental exposure to adhesives that he couldn't even look at without flinching. But the real damage wasn't physical. It was the quiet. The questions he was too afraid to ask. The truth he was terrified to face. When we got home, he limped inside first, moving carefully, each step a reminder of the night everything changed. I closed the door behind us and leaned against it, watching him take in the familiar space that suddenly felt foreign. He sank onto the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Samantha, he whispered, voice cracking, I'm sorry. The apology was thin, brittle, like it had been dragged out of him by the weight of the situation, rather than genuine remorse. I didn't respond. Not immediately. I walked past him, letting the silence stretch, letting it bite. I know I messed up, he continued, tears threatening. I know I hurt you, but what you did, it could have. I turned sharply. Could have what? The words cut through the air. Could have hurt you, embarrassed you, forced you to face the consequences of cheating on your wife. He swallowed hard. He had no defense. No explanation. No justification that could survive the truth between us. Over the next few days, he tried, soft gestures, calm words, avoiding arguments like his life depended on it. He called my name with a gentleness that had been absent for months. He hovered around the kitchen, offering help. He apologized again and again, as if repetition could undo betrayal. But every time he spoke, I heard the echoes of late-night lies. Every time he reached for me, I remembered the wrapper I'd found. And every time he winced from the lingering soreness, I remembered why I acted in the first place. The shift in our home was subtle at first, then unmistakable. He watched me with fear, yes, but also with something else, awareness. For the first time, he understood I wasn't the woman he could mold with promises and tender words. I wasn't the girl who rushed into marriage believing in a perfect man. I had changed. He had changed. The marriage had changed. And then, something neither of us expected happened. He broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But quietly, one evening while washing dishes, his back turned, shoulders trembling. I thought I'd never lose you, he whispered without looking up. But now I know I already did. The words hit me harder than I anticipated. Not because I pitied him, but because it was the first honest thing he'd said in months. We didn't reconcile that night. We didn't fight either. We simply existed in the same space, with truths laid bare and nothing left to hide. In the days that followed, I watched him try, really try to be the man he pretended to be when we married. Not out of fear this time, but out of understanding. The aftermath wasn't clean. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't simple. But for the first time, he acted like a man who understood the value of what he had nearly destroyed. And I acted like a woman who understood the power of her own choices. And the price of her own silence. The rest of our story was still unwritten. But one thing was certain. He would never underestimate Samantha again. The next morning, the world outside seemed unnervingly awake, as if the night had left whispers lingering in the air. By noon, I could feel it. The subtle shift in the neighborhood, The way eyes lingered just a little too long when we passed, the way conversations paused when we entered the room. The story had already begun to circulate, carried on whispers like leaves in the wind. Mrs. Adji from 2 doors down had stopped me while I collected the mail. Her smile was tight, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously. I nodded politely, but the raised eyebrows and the faint smirk said it all. She didn't need words. Everyone had already heard. I passed Mr. Okoro by the gate, watering his plants. His glance lingered, slow and deliberate. "I hope you're managing," he said, tone neutral, but I caught the flicker of judgment. And of course, the unspoken question, what on earth happened in your house last night? By afternoon, it was impossible to ignore. Children playing in the yard whispered my name, neighbors peeked from windows with hushed murmurs, and even the mailman seemed to deliver letters with a suspicious glance over his shoulder. The neighborhood had collectively become a courtroom, and I was the defendant, the prosecutor, and the jury all at once. Gossip spread in waves. Some said it was the husband's fault, a cautionary tale about betrayal and recklessness. Others whispered about me, half in admiration, half in disbelief, the wife who struck back, the woman who didn't let herself be fooled. I could feel the stories twisting, growing, reshaping themselves with every retelling. By the time the sun touched the rooftops, the incident had become legend. A cautionary tale, a scandal, a lesson all rolled into one. Despite it all, I remained calm. I watched the murmurs and the sideways glances with a strange sense of detachment. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let the judgment swirl like smoke. What they didn't know, and could never truly know, was the strength, patience, and control that had made the night happen. By evening, the gossip had found its rhythm. Some neighbors were careful to avoid us. Some dared a sly remark when they saw him outside, wincing with residual embarrassment. But I walked through it all with my head held high, feeling a strange, almost liberating satisfaction. The world could whisper all it wanted. The story belonged to me. And the truth, unseen, silent, precise, was far more powerful than any rumor. Inside my own mind, everything was louder than the whispers outside. So this is what it feels like, I thought, standing by the window as the neighborhood stirred with gossip. To be watched, to be measured, to be dissected by people who don't even know the shape of your pain. I breathed in slowly, holding myself steady. Let them talk. They weren't there when the truth cracked open. They didn't hear the lies. They didn't see the messages. They didn't feel that cold, sharp betrayal slicing through the warmth of a home I helped build. Every sideways look from a neighbor was like a finger poking at a bruise. Funny how people pretend to care when they really just want a new story to chew on. I caught my reflection in the glass, tired eyes, spine still straight. I didn't break. That's what matters. I didn't let the chaos swallow me. As footsteps passed outside and another pair of voices drifted into a hush, I felt a flicker of something I couldn't name. Not pride exactly, not satisfaction, but clarity. They can create whatever version of last night makes them feel superior or entertained. None of it changes what I know. I thought of him, his stammering excuses, the shame on his face, the realization that everything had consequences now. Everything. Let him sit with that. Let him feel the weight of what he almost destroyed. Then another thought slipped in, gentler. Unexpected. You survived this, and you didn't lose yourself. For a moment, the noise faded. The gossip, the looks, the questions, they all drifted to the background. All that remained was my heartbeat, steady and sure. I'm not ashamed, I'm not afraid, and I'm not finished. He told his version to anyone who would listen. A carefully edited story, cleaned of context and rinsed of accountability. In his version, he was the victim, the wounded husband who never expected Samantha to go that far. When I heard pieces of his tale drifting back to me through neighbors, coworkers, and even his cousins, I didn't react. I just listened silently, letting the words settle like dust on a shelf. Of course he would frame it that way. Of course he would turn the spotlight away from his own betrayal. He spoke about embarrassment. He spoke about pain. He spoke about shock. But never once did he speak about the cheating that led him there. Never once did he mention the nights he stretched the truth until it snapped. Never once did he admit to the decisions that pushed me past the edge of patience and into the realm of action. His story was incomplete. But people love incomplete stories, as long as they sound dramatic. I would catch my reflection in the mirror sometimes while hearing their whispers, my face calm, composed, unreadable. The woman he described in his version didn't match the woman staring back at me. In his story, I was unhinged. In my reflection, I was deliberate. In his story, I acted out of rage. In my reflection, I acted out of clarity. In his story, he was blindsided. In my reflection, he simply reaped what he had sown. I studied my own eyes, the slight lift of my chin, the steadiness that had returned to my bones. If people are going to talk, I thought, let them at least be talking about a woman who survived. A woman who saw the truth clearly to stop pretending. His version of events might have been louder, but my reflection was truer. His words were scattered. My truth was solid. And deep down, he knew it too. The therapist's office smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood, an attempt at calm that clashed sharply with the storm still swirling inside me. I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap, pretending for a moment that I was just another client with another problem, when the truth was far messier. "So, Samantha," the therapist began gently, her pen poised over a notebook, "what brings you here today?" I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tension in my chest. I guess I'm trying to process everything. The betrayal, the aftermath." My voice wavered slightly, but I forced it steady. She nodded slowly. "Tell me about it in your own words." I stared at my hands, the words spilling out hesitantly at first. "I discovered my husband was cheating. I found proof. I felt shattered. But then I acted. And now," I paused, swallowing the mix of guilt and satisfaction that bubbled up. "Now he's gone through something that made him understand. Maybe too late, maybe just enough. And I keep thinking about whether I overstepped, whether I should feel regret." The therapist listened quietly, without judgment, letting my confession hang in the air. "I know what I did," I continued, voice steadier now, "and part of me doesn't regret it, but another part wonders if I lost a piece of myself in the process. I feel powerful but also exhausted, and I don't know if that's healthy." She scribbled a note, then looked up with a soft smile. "You've been through an intense experience, Samantha. Betrayal, revenge, humiliation. These are all powerful emotions. What you're feeling, conflicting pride and guilt, is normal. The mind and body take time to reconcile the choices we make, especially when they involve someone we once trusted completely." I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. "It's just everyone talks. The neighbors, the gossip, and he's changed. He's scared, humbled. But I can't tell if this makes me stronger or something else. Something I don't fully understand yet." "That's part of what therapy helps with," she said gently. "Not to judge your actions, but to help you understand yourself. To untangle the guilt from the empowerment, the shock from the calm, and the anger from the clarity. Right now, you're carrying all of that. It's heavy, and it's okay to unpack it slowly." I exhaled, letting a tension I hadn't realized I'd held escape. For the first time, I admitted the complexity out loud. The mixture of anger, control, pride, and exhaustion. I need to know I'm not broken," I whispered. "You're not," the therapist said firmly. "You're processing, you survived betrayal, you acted. You felt everything, and now you're facing what comes after. That takes strength, more than most people can even imagine." I nodded again, feeling the weight on my chest ease just slightly. It wasn't closure. Not yet. But it was acknowledgement, mine and hers. And maybe, I thought, that was the first real step toward reclaiming the calm inside the storm. The day I realized the choice wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, came quietly, almost imperceptibly. I was sitting alone in the living room, the house empty except for the lingering hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The paramedics had gone, the hospital visit was over, and the neighbors' whispers had faded into a dull background noise I barely noticed anymore. I stared at the ceiling and let the silence settle around me. And then it hit. I had spent so long reacting to his betrayal, reacting to his lies, reacting to everyone else's judgment, that I had forgotten I could choose. Not revenge, not anger, not even forgiveness, just choice. I could let this marriage collapse entirely, let him disappear into the consequences of his own actions, and let the story end there. Or I could decide what came next. I could set the terms of my own life, take control of my happiness, and reclaim every piece of myself I had surrendered to love, expectation, and haste. The clarity was startling. The anger that had fueled my actions was still there, simmering, but now it was tempered by purpose. I don't have to let him define me anymore. I don't have to let his mistakes dictate my future. I imagined two paths. One was a shadowed corridor, dark and uncertain, full of whispered rumors, lingering resentment, and the echoes of broken trust. The other was open, bright, but required deliberate steps, patience, and boundaries I had never enforced before. The choice was simple in theory, impossible in practice. I closed my eyes, thinking of every sleepless night I had endured, every pang of betrayal, every ounce of quiet strength I had summoned to act. And then I whispered to myself, quietly, firmly, "This is mine to decide. Not him, not anyone else, me." When I opened my eyes, I felt something shift. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't relief. It was resolve. The choice had been mine all along, and finally I was ready to own it. Whatever came next, confrontation, rebuilding, leaving, I would step forward intentionally. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt whole. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected. The storm of betrayal, shock, and gossip had faded, leaving behind quiet lessons etched into every corner of my being. I had learned that control wasn't about holding others accountable. It was about holding myself steady, about making choices that reflected the person I wanted to be. He tried to rebuild slowly, cautiously, aware now of the line he had crossed. But this time, it wasn't about fear or submission. It was about understanding, about showing up fully if he wanted to remain in my life at all. I listened, observed, and decided carefully. I offered forgiveness where I could, but I never compromised the boundaries I had fought so hard to establish. My friends noticed the change in me. I moved differently, spoke differently, carried myself with a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. No one dared whisper as they had before, not because they were afraid, but because they knew the woman they once thought naive now walked with a strength that could not be shaken. Some nights I still caught glimpses of the past, the betrayal, the shock, the paramedics' faces, the whispers of neighbors. I didn't flinch anymore. I only allowed myself a small, private smile. Those events had shaped me, yes, but they hadn't broken me. I threw myself into work, into friendships, and into quiet passions I had neglected. I learned to love myself fiercely, without apology, without reservation. And in that space of self-respect and clarity, I discovered something profound. Life doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. It just needs to be fully, unapologetically yours. One evening, I walked past the same neighbors who had once gossiped with so much zeal. Their eyes met mine briefly, and I could feel their recognition, not just of me, but of the woman I had become. I didn't need to explain anything. The story had been told in my actions, in my calm strength, in the deliberate way I chose to live after the storm. And as I turned back toward my home, I whispered to myself, I survived, I reclaimed myself, and no one, not even betrayal, will ever take that away. Samantha had walked through fire and emerged whole, stronger, and entirely free. The rest of life stretched ahead, vast and open, and I was ready to meet it on my own terms. Time softened the edges of everything. Not erased, never erased, but softened the way sea waves smooth even the sharpest stones. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly healed. It happened in layers, in breaths, in small choices that quietly gathered strength in the background of my days. I found myself rediscovering parts of me I hadn't touched in years. I started watering the little garden behind the house again, a habit I abandoned when the marriage began to crumble. Watching new leaves push through the soil reminded me of what growth really looked like. Slow, patient, inevitable. I joined a small book club at the local community center. I almost didn't go the first time. Habit told me to shrink, to stay small, to avoid being seen too clearly. But something inside me nudged me forward. The first evening I attended, I laughed so loudly during a discussion that I startled myself. It felt good, like my laughter had been trapped in a corner of my chest and was finally free. With every passing week, I built a quiet independence. I fixed small things around the house myself. I learned to cook new meals just because they made me happy. I rearranged my schedule, gradually shaping a life that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. The nights were the hardest. They always are, when the world grows quiet and the mind grows loud. Those were the moments when the old memories tried to creep back in, the betrayal, the sting of lies, the humiliation of realizing someone you trusted deeply had drifted so far away. But even then, the pain didn't swallow me whole anymore. I had learned how to talk myself through it, how to sit with the sadness without letting it consume me. He tried in his own quiet way to make amends, not with grand gestures, those would have felt empty, but with consistency, respect, space. He apologized often, not for pity, but for accountability. Sometimes, I saw him glance at me with a mixture of regret and admiration, as if he was watching a woman he had never truly known until he had nearly lost her. But the beauty was this: I no longer lived for what he felt. The story was no longer anchored to him. My growth wasn't dependent on his regret, or his apologies, or his attempts at change. I was no longer reacting, I was living. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I found a picture of myself from years ago. I barely recognized the woman in it, hopeful, bright-eyed, unaware of the storms ahead. I held the picture for a long moment before setting it down, not with sadness, but with gratitude. That woman walked through fire so I could stand here now, stronger and clearer. Later that evening, I lit a candle, sat by the window, and let the soft breeze spill into the room. The world outside buzzed with its usual rhythm, but inside me, there was a stillness. A profound, steady stillness that felt like home. For the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel like something happening to me. It felt like something I was actively shaping. Whether I stayed, whether I left, whether love found me again or I chose a different path entirely, it didn't matter, because the foundation beneath my feet was finally solid. I realized then that healing isn't about forgetting or pretending. It's about reclaiming space within yourself. It's about recognizing your own strength, not in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones. In how you choose to wake up, in how you choose to breathe, in how you choose to live. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dim room. This is where I begin again.